So I was just going to show the audience very quickly Mark's Edgar Rice Burroughs related work, just to get the discussion going. Obviously, for many of you, you're aware that Cadillacs and Dinosaurs and Xenozoic Tales collections after those comic books came out have been very significant in Mark's body of work and his notoriety as a storyteller and artist, especially in pen and ink. And the latest collection edition has come out recently from Flesk, who's done a lot of his work in art books and other things, including graphic novels that have been published in the last few years. The very latest Burroughs-related work he's done has been for ERB Books, upcoming the Moon Maid Centennial editions, and he's done a title page for the Moon Maid volume, the Moon Men volume, and the Red Hawk volume, and you can see how he goes from rough pencils to tighter pencils into ink. He did the frontispiece for Gary Buckingham's Tarzan Lion of Judah. He did the frontispiece for the Beyond the Farthest Star restored edition for ERB Incorporated. This is a collection for Dark Horse put out on Pellucidar that was recent. There's one of those amazing pen and inks of his and brush with the Pellucidar battle scene. And a number of years ago, he did the title, the front covers for Dark Horse's reprinting of several Gold Key Tarzan comic books, most done by Russ Manning in collections, including this, that, and this. He also did a two-part series covers for Tooth and Nail. That was part of the monthly Tarzan title. And here's a number of his pencils and brush or pen and inks on other Burroughs storylines. Again, another example of how he works his art over stages. Again, he can do very tight pencils, sometimes as his end product. The Monster Men penciled and then colored pencil after to finalize it. And this is interesting. This was a Tarzan jam done by a number of artists, some of whom you recognize have done their own Burroughs work. That was meant to whet your appetite on Mark Schultz's. And there's Mark. Mark,
I'm back.
Mark,
How you doing?
Nice to meet you, Mark.
Hi.
So again, just thank you for being our guest artist, dialing in from Pennsylvania and the East Coast. And again, the people that participated have already gotten the background, as I mentioned. This is a question and answer based session. Mark is telling me anyone can ask a question at any time. Feel free to jump in, and it doesn't have to be about Edgar Rice Burroughs. So feel free to ask away as I use my framework just to get discussions going. And as a reminder, this is being recorded. All right, again.
Mark, what do you call home?
I'm in northeastern Pennsylvania, outside of Scranton, Pennsylvania. I grew up all over the state. Always lived in Pennsylvania, but in a lot of different locations, mostly out Pittsburgh way. So I got to see the great Carnegie Museum of Natural History with its great dinosaur collection there.
Great.
Thank you.
I have a question. I was at Kitchen Sink Press when your art came in, and I recall you sent a giant box Is that right? You had like it was a giant box. Of course, I was a comic book artist at
Yeah.
Kitchen Sink. That's a little bit of a jealous sibling, but I remember Dennis, and I think it was Pete. It might have been Dave. It was one or the other. Pete Poplaski, the art director, Dennis Kitchen, the publisher, and it was either Pete or Dave Schreiner, the editor. I can remember these two grown men had this big box, big flat box, and they had it on the floor of the office, and they're going through it, and they're oohing and awing, and I don't know if you had already been in Death Rattle at that point, if that was your samples. But what were you doing before that? Because you didn't jump into comics as a teenager or something. You were doing illustration before that?
Well, I went to college. I went to a school in Pennsylvania, Kutztown, and as a kid, I'd been a huge comic fan and a huge fan of illustrators. But I kind of got turned in college and became more of a fine art guy and was doing gallery type painting. It took me a while after I graduated and working many years as a security guard and and doing like local working for local advertising companies doing when they needed a guy who could do cartooning for an advertisement. I had a rip-off Walt Kelly style at the time, but it took me a while to figure out finally that what I wanted to do was tell stories, and the best way to tell stories for my skill set was comics. And so it wasn't until 85 that I got up the gumption I was turning 30, and that scared me. It was like, oh Jesus, my life is gone already, and I haven't done anything. So I finally got up the gumption to put together over like a 6-month period. I drew up a sample of my Xenozoic concept, and I shipped it off to the 6 or 7 comic companies at the time that I thought might be interested. And one was Kitchen Sink, and luckily they were interested. I was surprised that they were interested in the actual concept, the actual property, as opposed to just putting me on something else. But yeah, as Don mentioned, Dave Schreiner, Dennis Kitchen, they were all pretty willing to take chances, because I had no record at all as an artist, as an illustrator or a cartoonist, and they gave me a chance. And it over the long haul, they were patient with me because I was never much good with hitting deadlines, but it worked out over the long run for me. But I don't think I sent in a big package. That must have been someone else. I mean, my first submission was Xeroxes that, I literally mailed in through the post office. And when I tell students these days, they ask me how I got started in the business, and I tell them, well, I made Xeroxes of my work and I sent it through the post office. There's no connection there. It makes no sense to them.
Did you what was the order? You did a Death Rattle story first, was that right?
Yep, they tried me out in their anthology horror magazine, Death Rattle. That was my introduction to comics, and because there was a good enough reception for that, I guess Dennis suggested I give a try at my own book. Which, after doing one issue with that and not coming anywhere close to hitting a monthly deadline, that just about did it for me. I just about panicked and backed out of the business altogether.
Well, sending in Xeroxes is kind of like handing a young person today a dial phone.
Yeah, exactly. Which I've heard they've actually, someone did an experiment with a couple teenagers and asked them to use a dial phone, and they couldn't figure it out. But I guess, I can't figure out my cell phone, so.
Well, Dennis was one of the slower artists, and he always favored Pete Poplaski, who was a perfectionist and very slow.
Slow as
Pete,
well.
if you don't know, Pete did the Superman newspaper collection covers, and he was able to recreate any style I think that's why he liked you, as you know, you couldn't make a deadline. He liked having that. But the other thing that he enjoyed, and I know he never used these words, but it was like Al Williamson and Frank Frazetta and Wally Wood and little touches of Kniff and Loomis. They had all jammed on this comic book in the 50s, and for some insane reason had put it in a time capsule. And Dennis loved the idea of publishing like a lost EC issue. So what were your influences? What were you seeing that?
Well, it's funny you brought that up because up till the time I was like 12, 13 years old, I was Jack Kirby and Jim Steranko were kind of like my goals, the comic book artists that I most looked up to. But then when I was 13, I went to a department store, the book section of a local department store outside of Pittsburgh, and I found this, which is Lupoff's. This was the Ace edition of, and this is my copy that's dog-eared and falling apart, but this was my Bible. This turned me on to all the worlds of Burroughs, and introduced me beyond that to Robert E. Howard's works, and Lupoff did a great job of talking about people that had influenced Burroughs and people that Burroughs had influenced, and that introduced me to a lot of things. But it also introduced me to guys like Al Williamson, who I knew for his Flash Gordon work, but I never connected. For a long time, it took me a long time to connect that he was the same guy who was doing these great illustrations. And then, of course, Frazetta. So when I saw these, all of a sudden, this is what I wanted to do with my work. I wanted to emulate this romantic style that kind of came out of EC Comics. And before EC Comics, it came out of Hal Foster, Alex Raymond, and before those guys, you know, the great early 20th century American illustrators, including, you know, St. John, who did a ton of work with Burroughs. So anyway, yeah, that's where things really changed for me, Don. When I saw this book, it introduced me to the literary worlds that have kind of stayed with me all these years, as well as the style of art that meant so much to me, as you know, given me a template to follow. Long answer.
Good answer. Good
Okay.
answer.
All right, thanks.
Mark, that's appreciate that. We had an email question come in from Jim Latimer, and he asked me, what creatively drew you to Burroughs' stories, and did you have any favorites in terms of stories, characters, or other settings?
Wow. Yeah, it's a toss-up between the John Carter stories and the Pellucidar stories. You gotta like the Pellucidar stuff because I mean, there's something just really weird about the idea of a hollow earth filled with dinosaurs, which I don't know, that resonates with me, and I've exploited it too. But the Martian stories are. I just was on a long road trip, and guy I was riding with, Jim Reed, and I listened to The Chessmen of Mars, which I hadn't read since I was a teenager. It's been a long time. And man, did that hold up well. It really does. There's a lot of humor I had missed as a kid. There was a lot of humor in that book, as well as the swashbuckling. But I think, I don't know, Burroughs just did it better than anyone else, mixing adventure with these weird pseudo-scientific concepts and half-naked women, of course. That's when you're 13 years old. That's a big selling point. It all worked for me.
Mark, if I wanted to ask you, this is sort of a strange question, but of all the illustrators, it seems to me that you, and I love this, how you portray your women who are sort of softy. They have more body to them, if I could say that. Do you know the word softish?
Yeah.
Yeah.
German. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like that. And they all have a wonderful, very human kind of feel to them, and not more like these models or just sort of stock characters. Is that something that you've just came out of you naturally, or did you approach that on purpose that way?
Well, thanks for noticing that. I mean, that is important to me, and I even though obviously I'm doing women that are dressed and positioned and developed to appeal to young men, you know, that's a given. But I don't like the idea of the woman being a victim. I always want the women that I draw to look like they can take care of themselves,
Yeah,
even if they're in a position of being threatened. They're not defeated. They've got a weapon. They've got some way out of the situation. But yeah, I personally like women that are pretty good at taking care of themselves. So it goes back to when I write my own characters. I love like Barbara Stanwyck. If you're a fan of old movies,
yeah,
yeah, someone who could take care of herself.
right.
It doesn't mean that she was standoffish, the characters, but they're not dependent upon, they're not damsels in distress. So
Right.
and as far as the physical look of them, that's just what I do. I have no idea.
Well, one of the things that I like too about what you're talking about that is that so many illustrators, when they portray the female in these illustrations, whoop, did I get turned off? Still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. They very often use the what I call the sexual presenting pose, with their butt, and I blame Frazetta for that because he did so much of that. But I'm glad that you don't do that. You have such great images and imaginative ways of putting them, and very dignified. I was thinking when Henry was showing us the slides, and I think there was one image of the drawing of Thuvia of Mars with a banth, and I thought, when is that going to come out as a print? Because I really love to have that as a print.
Thank you. Maybe someday.
Someday, I'll have to make a print for myself, I think.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, and it's, there should be something for everyone out there, I guess, but it's just what it's no more than what I'm attracted to.
Yeah.
And I don't find it all attractive that and just to mention, Frazetta kind of, I know what you're saying about Frazetta's always, he kind of, I don't want to say invented that look, because I guess theoretically you could go say Peter Paul Rubens invented the Zoftig woman with a lot of flesh and in improbable postures. But Frazetta certainly kind of codified it and did it more organically, more naturally. It works for me. But then there's unfortunately, an awful lot of artists illustrators, cartoonists who take that but don't understand. They just take it to a pin-uppy place. It's not organic. It doesn't work for whatever's happening. It's just obviously an artificial positioning for, well, and it sells, unfortunately. And that's one reason you see a lot of it, because it sells.
Yeah. It's a pin-up. It's not really an illustration or a real picture of something to me, in a classic sense. But thanks. Yeah.
But yeah, different strokes for different folks,
Yeah.
It's comic books, baby.
Yeah. I was going to ask another question about storms at sea, which I really loved. I loved the way that those pictures by themselves are so enigmatic. And even the story itself is sort of enigmatic. But I understand that you're working on a second volume of that, a continuation of that.
Yeah, it'll be a continuation. It's a sequel, but this one will be more of an adventure story. Storms at Sea was kind of like the setup to the whole concept of this world, and there's not a lot of story in that. It's a lot of backstory, but
Yeah.
this will be more of a straight ahead, if I do it right, more of a Burroughsian type of, yeah, adventure mixed with hard-boiled detective nonsense,
Yeah.
a little
Yeah.
bit of everything.
Now, is that where Pushkara comes from? Is that in that story? Because I missed that, but then I start seeing it on some of the illustrations, captions.
Pushkar is a borrowed name. It comes,
Oh.
it's a Hindi, part of the Hindu tradition of, I think it's a level of paradise. And my pardon to anyone who knows the Hindi religion better than I do or practices it. I'm probably misstating it, but I borrowed it.
Okay. I'll do
It's
some research on it then.
hopefully a learned borrowing, for the purpose that I'm using it for.
Yeah, I love the variety of life forms that you've created.
Well, there's going to be a lot of giant crabs in the one that I'm working on now.
Oh, okay. Giant crabs.
Giant crustaceans and mollusks.
And mollusks. Okay, great.
But giant, that's the secret. You take anything that's tiny and you make it giant, you got a story, you got a story.
And you've got a monster.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's half the battle right there.
Right there. It's great. Yeah.
Hey, Mark Henry Franke again. I'm curious about which kinds of media and which kinds of art presentations you enjoy doing the best. You actually mentioned you started out actually doing paintings, and then migrated out. But I mean, do you find pencils something you really enjoy, or is pen and ink and brush and ink something that you enjoy more than other approaches, or are you even hoping to go back to doing some painting again?
Yeah, all the above, Henry. I'm most I guess you'd say secure using a brush and ink. That's kind of my safety zone. I feel that I have a handle on that. I really enjoy working with various types of a pencil material because you can get all sorts of great tonal things happening, and both brush and ink and pencil. I really love black and white art, monochromatic art. I love black and white photography, black and white cinematography, and when you remove color from the equation, other factors become important that I really like composition and lighting. Now, having said that, though, I am hoping to be able to spend more time painting because I really like painting too. And in the last 2 years, I started to get deeper into that again. I'm still a long way off from feeling that I know what I'm doing painting, but I'm working on it. Yeah.
Just following on from what Henry asked you, Mark, I noticed in some of the drawings which he had shown just prior to this that you used blue pencil. Do you prefer using a blue pencil before you start doing your inking, or do you just prefer ordinary graphite pencils?
I go back and forth. I use both. Mostly I use a graphite pencil. The nice thing about the blue pencil is it doesn't smudge as much as graphite, but it's harder to erase. So a lot depends on the project I'm working on, how much I want to, how detailed I want the picture to be, as opposed to how lightly I pencil it and make it easier to erase, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yes, it does. Yeah.
Could I ask a question that follows up on that?
Sure.
when you see the slideshow, there are a lot of really tight, detailed pencils. Is that how you normally work, or do you pencil in a layout and then switch to ink? Or how far do you normally go with the pencils before you ink? Or do you go complete with pencils and then ink over?
I generally do a pretty detailed pencil piece. I'm trying to think. Bear with me here a minute. Let's see if I can find an example to show you. Okay, here we go. I'll give you a visual. So I just did a cover for, I just completed a cover for Eric Powell's The Goon comic. So anyway, this is on like a 9x12 piece of paper. I do a preliminary in pencil, pretty detailed. And one reason I go into that amount of detail and finish is I know I can sell that too, as well as the finished piece. So it's just a bit of crass commercialism on my part. Now, what I do with this then, once I'm happy with this and I get approval, is I scan it into the computer, into Photoshop, and I blow it up to the size I'm going to do the finish. And I print that out, and I'm able to use a light box to transfer the image onto Bristol board, again in pencil, and I will do some more changes. Like, I don't know how well you can see this. If you can see the Goon character and the position he's in this, it didn't look dynamic enough for me. So I changed it a bit, made it a bit more dynamic. And again, making little creatures big and scary. That's my go-to. But anyway, so I blow it up to a larger size. This is about 11x16. Pencil it in using a light box and finish it up in ink. But all these steps along the way, I'm evolving the drawing. I'm changing it. I'm making corrections if I'm not quite happy. And so all steps of the process are an evolution.
Just
Right.
curious, since you're scanning it into the computer and using Photoshop, why don't you finish it up digitally instead of by hand?
Well, two reasons. One,
You can't sell it.
yeah, that's an important one. I can't sell the original then. And a big part of my income is selling the original art. So the other reason is I just like working by hand. I'm old school. I enjoy the actual process of using a brush by hand. And when I have experimented with digital media, digital possibilities, there are times when it makes sense to use that for coloring and stuff, and for some corrections, but I really don't get any particular enjoyment out of it. It's just kind of like a necessary, it's a good tool to have in your arsenal, but it's not what I would choose to do.
There's nothing, as an artist, I think I can share this. There's nothing like the feel of the brush going over the paper or the pencil going over the paper, and you get so sensitized to that, that sort of adds to what you do with it, whether you use a heavy line or whether you use a light line or however you're moving.
And I'm sure you relate to this too. A lot depends on the paper and the ink and the brush, how things are working that day. There's a lot of it's not like every time it's the same textural thing happening. It changes, and sometimes it's a challenge, and sometimes it's like, oh my goodness, this is going great. Why doesn't it go this great all the time? Other times it's like, not working. I got to make the best of it and make it work some way. So it's always interesting. Yeah.
I can't remember if you did the coloring on the stuff that you've done for Flesk, the big poster.
The
With the
Xenozoic.
mastodons moving. Did you do that?
Oh, the hold on. I don't know. Again, are you talking about this one?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's a painting. I did that. That's gouache.
Ah, okay. That's gouache.
That's gouache. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Which I like a lot because it doesn't take up as much space and it doesn't smell as bad as oil painting with turpentine and everything.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you can still get some real variety of effects from a very watercolorish, type of deal to a washy, to a kind of an impasto thing that is close to oils. But yeah, I'm really enjoying. That's what I'm working now when I'm painting is with gouache.
Great. Yeah, I've never been able to go after. I've used what I call a sort of an opaque watercolor where I'm laying on color heavily, but I've never actually gone to gouache. And
it's challenging because the colors dry different. When they're wet, they look different than when they're dry. So you have to kind of anticipate how it's going to change. But it's putting in the reps, the more I do it, the more it makes sense to me.
That's great. That's what the old guys used a lot.
Yeah.
The commercial illustrators, the guys that we admire, a lot of times they use gouache rather than oil.
Well, who really inspired me was, again, another guy who did Burroughs illustrations, Herbert Morton Stoops, who did covers for Blue Book.
Yeah.
And as well as great brush and ink interior illustrations. But he used gouache, and I got to see some of his originals, and holy Toledo. At first, I thought it was oil. But nope.
Wow.
Just a master of getting different effects and techniques from opaque watercolor gouache.
Yeah, that's great. I have yet to frame that print. I keep meaning to put it up.
Thank you for taking part in the Kickstarter. Geez.
Oh yeah, thank you. I loved it. And I'm looking forward to the next one. When are you going to do another one?
Year or two.
Too slow.
Too slow. I'm not getting any faster with age, that's for sure.
Oh no. We've got another Xenozoic volume coming out, I hear.
It's been in the pipeline for quite a while. It's like 2/3 done, but again, it's something I work on when I can afford to. So it's going to be a while before it's finished.
Yeah.
Mark Henry Franke again. You've mentioned obviously Edgar Rice Burroughs. You've mentioned Robert E. Howard, and of course your work for some of the quality Conan and other Robert E. Howard stories are a significant part. What other writers have you been particularly interested in? Either have drawn or would like to draw interpretations of their work?
Wow. Oh my goodness. I've always wanted to illustrate H.G. Wells' First Men in the Moon. But I mean Verne, Wells, it's all the usual suspects. I don't think I'm going to say anything that's going to surprise anyone. You know who I'd like to, I read a few years ago, I finally got around to reading H. Rider Howard Haggard's She. And man, is there some great imagery in that book. Wow. That would be fun to illustrate. And
that could use a new edition. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything in a long time. And there's just not a lot of illustrations looking online. Not a lot has been done with this story. And it's got so many great visual elements in it. More recently, I'd love to do some Fritz Leiber. I love Fritz Leiber's work. And I'm a big fan of Cordwainer Smith's work. I'd love to be able to illustrate some of his stuff. I'm sure I'm just not thinking of a lot of people, but those are a few that would be fun to illustrate.
It's interesting, especially with Rider Haggard. Mark, you've been writing the Prince Valiant Sunday strip now since 2004, I understand. Of course, I think we still have Thomas Yates on the line. What got you into scripting that strip?
Well, the previous artist on the strip, Gary Gianni, who had been working with John Cullen Murphy. John Cullen Murphy had taken over the strip from when Hal Foster retired from drawing. And John Cullen Murphy's son, Cullen Murphy, had been writing it for decades. As John Cullen Murphy got a little bit older, he brought Gary Gianni on to assist him. And when John Cullen Murphy retired, Gary took over the art chores completely. And shortly after that, Cullen Murphy, John Cullen's son, was ready to retire too. He had principally been writing the script to work with his father. So they needed a new scripter. And Gary very kindly recommended me to the people at King Features. And I submitted a few proposals to them that they apparently liked. And that was it. Dove right into the script with Gary. Gary had a foundation in doing it already, so that helped a great deal. So I worked with Gary for, I believe it was 8 years, and then Gary retired from the strip, and Thomas Yates took over, and I've been working with Thomas ever since.
No plans to retire from that?
Well, it's been about 20 years. Next year it'll be 20 years I've been doing it. So I think the end is closer than in the beginning. It's I see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's it's going to draw to a close for me within the next few years, I suspect.
Yeah, did Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated ever approach you about either writing or drawing one of their online strips?
Not the online stuff. Nope. No. The only work I've done with them has been the frontispiece I did for the Beyond the Farthest Star book collection.
Yeah.
Well, that's unfortunate. Maybe they're in awe of the.
I think there's possibilities in the future. I think they had asked me if I could paint some a cover, and I didn't feel that I was ready to do that. So I declined, but.
Why didn't you think you were ready? When was that?
There's
Hey,
Thomas.
Well, this was a couple years ago, and I don't know. I just don't feel my painting chops are there yet. I'm working on it.
Okay. Well, I
Okay.
would have loved to see that. So they didn't want to cover this with the gouache style that you're used to using or something, or. But I mean, you're doing great color stuff. Just
Well,
different animals.
I feel comfortable doing the stuff that I generate the idea for, but if I had to do John Carter or Diane the Beautiful, or I'd be intimidated. I can do it. I can do it in ink. I don't feel ready to do it in paint yet.
Oh, interesting. How do you know it? It's
Yeah.
darn Carter type. I'm familiar with that.
Someday.
All right.
Hey, is this your new studio, Thomas?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, I'll since you've asked me.
Well, yeah, load, I think.
Yeah, move your camera around a little bit. Oh, yeah, that's good.
And if come closer, Dan. So passing
Somewhere?
Sacramento last
I
night.
don't have to go
Dan,
back. I can go to Tina. I could just drop it off. They're interchangeable, but I usually go to the libraries.
so Dan Parsons is here with me. And yes, this is my new studio here. I just moved. I've got
Nice.
I'm there. I've got a
Oh, that's
joke.
right. They automatically review them, renew them. So.
Hey, Henry, could you mute somebody there?
Yeah, people talking in the background.
Yeah, he's on a telephone and that makes it harder to mute him.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
All right, good. Thanks.
because when he talks, then the camera shifts.
Oh,
to-
trust
Exactly.
me,
Yeah.
I understand.
Oh, okay.
So anyways, it's a little view.
All right, let's
Very
see.
nice
Go
and
ahead.
clean, Thomas.
Yeah, I'm lucky. I've got a full place, full new place. I just moved to. Henry's been here,
Uh,
and Mark's coming. I'm gonna get Mark out to Sacramento. I hoping early next year. So that's
Yeah, for Sacramento Con. Yeah.
That's right. There will be a next Valiant team up there. I would just want to mention that for me, this has been like the ultimate working experience to get to work with artists was so pathetic in our vision and what we like and you know, the kind of ideas that we come up with and being open to my ideas is sort of a totally new thing for me to have a work with a writer who's interested in my ideas. Not that he can use them necessarily, but he listens to them, and that's totally,
Hey,
that's satisfying. He listens to it.
I've worked with artists who totally wasn't on the same page with, and I've been an artist working with writers who, again, there's no connection there. So working with someone like Thomas is a dream because, first of all, our interests and our literary and artistic background is pretty similar. And I think we have very few disagreements about things. And the nice thing is, I like to call it, you know, you're batting ideas back and forth. I might come up with a basic idea for a story and I'll throw it out to Thomas and he'll come back with, well, what if we did it this way? He'll have ideas that I would never think of. And we go back and forth and it builds a better story, I think. You know, the old two heads are better than one thing.
Yeah,
Great.
I think that's true. It's just that a lot of writers I've worked with in my career, I don't know, I mean, they were great talent. They just didn't want to work that way, you know, for whatever reason. So I was just working out great. And I don't know if I were to use, I don't know who I would replace myself with today because in that old technique, you know.
It's not a lot.
Not a lot of people in the younger age group who are up to that level in that style. You know, there's a lot of super talented guys, but pretty different rushing into on paper, you know. Not that many. But I'm going to hang in the spot. Got this house, right? Look at like a standard. Have to do more and more stretches to put in the hours at the drawing board, which I'm thinking right now. That's really good.
Mark, do you have a favorite ERB book?
Wow, that's a toughie. Wow. No, I can't break it down to one, but I would say the first two books in the Pellucidar series and the the first 5 books of the Martian series. I was going to say the first trilogy, but that's too narrow. The Thuvia and Chessmen are too good. Also, though, I love the Land of Time Forgot trilogy and the Moon Maid trilogy, which I just reacquainted myself with when I did some frontispieces for the new collection that's coming out. And holy crap, that's those are three stories that are just stretching what you think of Burroughs doing. They're all very different, but they all jibe together so well. So just for sheer, I don't know, just for sheer artistic merit, the older I get, I think maybe the Moon Man made trilogy is his greatest achievement.
That's a very strongly written book.
Yeah. Yeah, and it showcases his fantasy stuff, his knowledge of doing westerns, and then that offbeat, you know, social realism story in the middle. It's just like, you know, Burroughs going out on a limb.
I'm a little surprised you didn't mention any of the Tarzan books.
You know, Tarzan, I gotta say, is I hate to, I'm going to get in a fight here with someone, I feel, but it's my least favorite of Burroughs' works. When I'll tell you, here's something else I want to show. When I was 8 years old, this is my first, my first encounter with Tarzan was the movies, the Johnny Weissmuller movies, which were shown on TV when I was a kid. Early on Saturday morning, I'd get up at like 6 a.m. And there was where I lived out in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, there was a jungle theater where they showed Johnny Weissmuller movies and Burroughs' Jungle Girl movie serial with Francis Gifford. And I loved those. But then when I was 8 years old, I picked up this Whitman edition, abridged edition of Tarzan. And for whatever reason, it just didn't do it for me. I don't know. And it wasn't until I learned about all his other worlds that I really, really appreciated Burroughs. So I'm one of those people in the minority that just, I don't have anything against Tarzan, but they don't suck me in like the other stories do.
Dick Lupoff was not a huge Tarzan fan. He liked Tarzan, but he was really into the other stuff too, I remember.
Yeah. Although he certainly gives Tarzan a lot of credit for all the other authors that were inspired by Tarzan, including Howard coming up with Conan. And he draws a lot of nice threads between people who inspired Burroughs to write Tarzan, like the Mowgli stories, and then where other artists took the creature. So Tarzan is undoubtedly his most important creation. Yeah, that's just me. Oh, you know what? The Tarzan stories I love the best, going back to I Like Strong Women, were the stories where Jane gets to kick some ass. Tarzan the Terrible, and the one I think is Tarzan's Quest, where there's a plane crash and she you know, all these other guys are trying to act like they know what they're doing in the jungle, and she goes along with it until finally she has to save all their necks. And she gets to show her knowledge of jungle craft. And I love that story. And I wish that Burroughs had used her like that more often.
I agree
Tarzan's
with you.
Quest.
It's probably my favorite one. And in fact, ERB Inc. hired me to write a foreword to their uniformed edition of Tarzan's Quest, and I think it's been released now.
Oh, great. Oh, I'll look for that. That's fantastic.
But that is probably my favorite Burroughs book. And
The
yes,
only-
because of Jane.
Yeah, and the only thing that's wrong with it is once Jane and Tarzan get back together, Jane goes into a more recessive role. But when she's on her own, or you know, leading the survivors of this plane crash, you know, she's a force to be reckoned with. She's something.
Oh, yes.
I love the St. John illustration of her with a bow and arrow in the forest shooting, I don't know what she was shooting, but there's a leopard or a boar or something. Great, you know, slightly effeminate St. John, softly rendered, you know, Jane and she's not in a loincloth, you know, she's in, you know, kind of safari clothes, got her going there.
Yeah.
That's great. As far as requests, I actually started doing an adaptation of that when I was in high school.
Oh,
So I
wow.
was so much, I started drawing it on like binder paper with Mark Schultz pins that bled through, you know, pretty awful.
Do you still have it, Thomas?
We all want to see it.
Yeah.
It's possible. I do think I have it, but it's pretty bad. It's real early. I got better. And later I did another adaptation. I found none of these were finished. They just started of beyond 30 that I was sharing with people that Mangani got it, and I found that one was okay. That did when I was 18, and I kind of figuring it out. This other one I did when I was more like 12 or something. It's pretty bad.
Oh, you got to dig that out and at least do a down and dirty photograph of it so we can see it. Jeez.
Yeah. It's the
Well,
spirit that counts.
Yeah.
The spirit?
Yeah,
it's the spirit that counts, Thomas.
All right. Well, we'll see. I'll revisit that when I go to my other place where it's
I'll tell you what, Thomas, if you do that, I'll dig out some of my stuff from that period too. And then, and believe me, it won't be impressive.
All right. Maybe we could come up with a amateur, useful, indiscretion at the drawing board article in the Burroughs Bulletin or something.
Absolutely.
It's called Juvenilia.
Yes.
In the book world, it's Juvenilia. So it'd be fair,
Absolutely.
And Thomas will know that I already begged him to do that when I saw the pages at the Mangani gathering a few weeks ago. So keep pushing. Maybe your Bible will break. Their wills will break.
Apply the pressure.
Mark, you've attended quite a few conventions, obviously over the years. Are you getting any feedback from younger people about Burroughs, or at least Burroughs-like artwork? Is there any hope that we'll get more generations interested in Burroughs interpretations or the books themselves?
Wow. Beyond Pulp Fest, where I saw you last, Henry, I don't do a lot of conventions that are, that tend to draw people that are into literary works as opposed to comics. So I gotta say, yeah, as far as younger people, I don't see a lot. Maybe one or two will come across and surprise me. But unfortunately, it's hard. I find it very hard to get the kids interested in any kind of pulp-oriented literature. I don't know. I'm hoping someone can tell me otherwise here. I feel like I'm floundering here. I'm not giving a very hopeful answer, but yeah, it worries me. It really worries me that there does not seem to be an upcoming generation that are investing in this type of story.
Well, there's still interest in Tarzan in this. There's yet another, movie company has optioned the Tarzan project, I guess. And, despite the, criticism of the last one and the end of the part of it. And there are like young YouTube channel book reviewers who have positively reviewed Burroughs. I think Henry, were you sending those out a couple of years ago? There was some links to these reviews, or maybe it was my daughter, Olivia. They were kind of being sent around that, hey, look at this, and there's some young gal who's got a YouTube channel, who's an avid reader, and he's expanded beyond manga or Twilight, or Harry Potter to Edgar Rice Burroughs and said, hey, this stuff is really fun, you know.
Oh, good.
Enjoyed it. So it's not completely free, but I'm sure that, you know, it isn't super popular, but it's not completely.
All right, thanks for that. We're getting close to an hour with Mark. I thought I would ask him one other question and then open up if he still wants to entertain questions. Mark, I'm curious about your next major project coming up, either writing or drawing or both.
Well, I am, as I mentioned earlier, I'm working on a follow-up to my Storms at Sea story. That's my principal task right now. I do have that Xenozoic graphic novel in the pipeline that I will finish up eventually. Other than that, I will be putting together, you know, continuing collections of my work that Flesk Publications will publish. But yeah, that's about it.
Do you think that Flesk might be interested in concentrating your Edgar Rice Burroughs related work into an art book portfolio style, or something that would actually be ERB?
That's possible. It would be something I would want to discuss with Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated and make sure they were good with that. If we were, it would only make sense to do something like that if we were actually promoting it as such, as a collection of illustrations of the works of Burroughs, and we would have to make sure we had, you know, the rights to do that, some sort of an agreement. But yeah, that would makes a lot of sense. That would be I think that would be an attractive package. I think that's a good idea.
I think there are a lot of ERB fans that aren't aware of how much work you've done over the years. So I think there's at least a baseline audience.
Well, my work has been very scattershot with Burroughs, so it's not surprising. But I think you know, when I look at the PowerPoint presentation that you put together of my work, and that wasn't all of it, but it's more than I remembered. You know, you do a little bit here, a little bit there, and you forget what you've done. So that's pretty cool to see how many pieces you were able to find.
That's good news. Are you anyone else with questions for Mark while we have him?
I just have one question. I was wondering, when you do your illustrations, do you use models or reference photos, or just imagination?
A little of both. It depends on the imagery. If I'm doing an exaggerated fight scene, most of that comes out of when you're doing something that's exaggerated, you can cheat a little bit. If I'm doing something that we all know from seeing every day, for instance, someone sitting in a chair or walking down steps, you would be surprised how hard it is sometimes to get the balance of everything's right. And then you need to get reference, or I need to get reference. So I do take photographs. I do a lot of looking on the internet. I mean, I used to have a huge library of reference material that I've gotten rid of because I look on the internet. If I was doing a panel for the Xenozoic story of a man kneeling in the surf, the ocean surf, throwing water on his face. And I just put that into Google Images, and I got like 20 images of exactly that, a man kneeling in the surf, throwing water on his face. So it's amazing how much reference material is out there at the touch of your fingers now. So I use whatever I need to use. Models off the internet, looking at how other illustrators have handled a particular subject matter. I use it all.
Yeah. I actually had a question about original art and how you handle that. Are you working through dealers, or are you like for instance, in the Goon variant cover that you did, would you offer that to Eric Powell first, or what's the process?
I act as my own agent. It's up. I never suggested anyone should buy it. So if Eric would be interested, he would say something. I wouldn't presume that he'd be interested. But yeah, it's pretty much first come, first serve. I haul my stuff around the conventions, and I have a gallery site at the Flesk Publications website.
Okay.
Where I put up new work every so often. So yeah,
I mean, I feel lucky to have gotten a few trinkets early on, but I mean, your price point is out of my reach now. But I get together with a lot of Toronto area collectors, and I know that the Meachams have quite a bit of your stuff. And
they did they bought something from me a year ago. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, they're very excited about that. So
no, yeah, I can't afford my stuff either. It's no, art prices are what they are, and I go by
they've gotten crazy.
The market tells me it's worth, but yeah, I can't afford that stuff anymore. I used to collect art too, but it's beyond my
yeah.
Especially when I have a house that something needs fixed all the time, the toilet
right.
or something. That's where the money goes.
I have a kind of a follow-up question. I don't know if you heard, but John Burnett passed away from Dragon Lady Comics. And I remember that he brought you and Bill Stout and Al Williamson up to a convention. I remember that convention very well. And
yeah, goodness, yeah, that's right. Dragon Con. It was Dragon Lady, yeah.
Dragon Lady, yeah, because he had a huge collection of illustrations that I know Al Williamson was really obsessed over. I think he was a Spanish illustrator. I can't remember his name now.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank too. But
right.
Yeah, we got to, at that convention, he took us out to his house out in Mississauga, I believe.
I think so, yeah.
And we saw some of his collection, and it was pretty extraordinary.
Do you know Jeff Singh at all?
I don't know him personally. He has purchased work for me, and
he's got a few of your originals. Yeah. Anyway, he's been apparently. I think he purchased the bulk of John Burnett's collection because he had a lot of stuff.
They went to a good place. I'm glad to hear that. Great. Yeah. Are you in Toronto or the area?
I'm a little bit east of. I'm in Oshawa now. So
okay, all right.
But it's like a half-hour drive into the city. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's been a long time since I've been to Toronto.
Right.
I used to get up there back in the early 90s when they were producing the Cadillacs and Dinosaurs television show.
Well, you probably forgot me, but I used to work on that show.
No kidding.
And I was at Nelvana at that time. You came through with Marv Wolfman, I think, and
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Is that Rick?
Rich Danny's,
yeah. My God, I'm sorry. It's been so.
That's okay. It was a long time ago. So
yeah.
I was designer on your show. It was a great honor to work on that.
Absolutely, yeah. But that was the last time I was to Toronto was probably '93 then when that was being developed.
Right, that was a long time ago. Yeah. You ever think about doing another animated series? Did anybody approach you about?
Every so often, someone. It never amounts to anything.
I feel sad because we only got to do the one season, and I thought we did a really good job on it, but it never went anywhere. Yeah.
No, it was a hard sell, I think, and there was a lot of problems with syncing up the merchandising.
Yeah.
To debut with the show, and that was a problem. And
yeah, Tyco Toys. I
can't believe when I saw everything that went on with that show. And this was an animated version of Xenozoic Tales. If people don't know, that was on CBS television in '93. But it was developed. It was produced by Nelvana in Toronto, and Rich was one of the designers of the show. Yeah. But they, I mean, that was my experience with animation and the television business. And it's a marvel that anything gets done.
I can't believe it.
On time, because I remember up to the last minute they were adding effects and stuff to that weekly episode that had to go out to the stations or how it was distributed literally up to like I think an hour before they had to go out.
Yeah,
just crazy.
Well, you were very fortunate to have a Japanese service studio that did a lot of the animation because you know, the cheap route would have been Korea or another studio, but the show actually ended up looking very good because they went with a higher end service
Yeah.
studio.
Did that, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask if that show ever got on DVD or anything.
I think there is a collection of. I don't have it, but I'm pretty sure that they
years
must have a
ago.
collection.
Well, there was a VHS collection of, I think, 4 of the episodes. I think there were two tapes with 2 episodes on each.
That's
But
quite possible.
last thing I knew, it was still available through Amazon Prime or something. You could see the episodes if you subscribe to it.
Okay.
But yeah, it never came out on CD or DVD rather, that I'm aware of. No.
Too bad.
Well, and the reason I was just going to say, Rich, not to get too technical here, but one of the problems, my understanding is once something has been developed and has had merchandising and everything connect with it, it's really hard to do all the due diligence and to get everything cleared up for a new production to happen.
No, I can believe it.
I imagine you, know more about that than I do, but it's just
Well, the year that followed, we actually did Jim Lee's Wildcats for half the budget and half the schedule. So I just felt like the whole thing was going in the wrong direction. You know, Nelvana was a company that used to do a lot of kids programming, and Cadillacs and Dinosaurs and Wildcats were a little higher in the food chain. You know, teens would watch it, young adults would watch it, and I don't think they had the patience or the interest. So,
well, I'll tell you, well, now it's grandchildren that come up to me and say, my grandfather, for a long time, it was like, hey, my parents turned me on to this show that they watched when they were young. And now it's grandparents are turning their kids on. So it has continued to have an effect. It continues to bring in new readers.
Yeah.
Excellent. And I'm happy to go on, but we did promise Mark we'd keep this down to reasonable length. Mark, anything you want to add to the audience, or have a last question?
I appreciate everyone's, being willing to talk, to discuss, but I'm if people have more questions, I'm willing to continue. So whatever sounds good.
I'll ask a question. Have you been asked to do any formal teaching of other young artists, or even yourself done more formal training here and there on art?
Well, I do teach on occasion at the Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, Georgia, when they need a substitute. If someone goes on sabbatical, they need someone. So I've done that a few times, and I do workshops with them on occasion, and I do presentations at other colleges, art schools, but I have no degree in education. I have no formal training, so it's kind of more of an apprenticeship, I guess, when I'm there. I just try to do my best to impart my experience in the business and help guide people in the right direction.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mark, I'd like to know what you think about the various artists that drew Tarzan in the comic strips, or in the Sundays, like John Solardo and Vern Hogarth, Russ Manning. What do you think of those guys?
Well, I wish I was even close to as fast as those guys were to have to do that every day. No, I've great admiration for all of them. I grew up with Russ Manning, working on, first of all, the backup in Tarzan. What was it? The Brotherhood of the Spear in Gold Key, and then on Tarzan. And so I have a great deal of affection for his work. And Solardo and Bob Lubbers are excellent artists. Vern Hogarth, not my thing. I admire what he did. It's important. it's not quite my jam. He's a little what's the word? Expressionistic or something for Tarzan, which I see as a more naturalistic. I mean, my interest goes back to Foster and the way he handled it, which was very different, and Hogarth brought his own thing to it, which is again important, and it's great, but it's just it's not my favorite version of Tarzan.
I've always felt that Bern Hogarth will be remembered more for his jungles than for his figures, but that's my opinion.
I would agree with that, actually. Absolutely. There certainly is a great richness to his work. That for me, it's the jungles and the gnarly trees, and that really, yeah.
But the figures get somebody, and I wish I remembered who it was, but some critic of Bern Hogarth said, it's like ballet dancers. His figures, they're so posed. They don't have the naturalism that Hal Foster had when he brought to a strip that he didn't even want to really do. And yet, every week he turned out this marvelous pieces of art. And, you ask him about it later in his life, and he was like, oh, Tarzan, I don't even read it.
Foster, I don't think, if I had to choose one person in the history of, at least the history of dramatic comics, adventure comics, the most important has to be Foster. You don't have everything else that came later without Foster kind of taking what had been a medium that was about comedy and laughter and figuring out how to tell a dramatic story and create tension and suspense. He really brought that all to the table.
Yeah, he's still very recognizable as a master.
Well, Thomas and I talk about this, how he did that on a weekly basis. Prince Valiant, huge, intricate, and knowing, he came out of illustration, yet he knew, doing like panels to panel in a comic strip format, he knew how to eliminate the excess detail that would have been in an illustration, but it's still all there. It's brilliant. He would, the forests and stuff that he would draw were just and then he knew how the color being added in there would complete the picture. That was color that was being added mechanically by the printers. Brilliant, just brilliant.
And people, if I can jump in another thing, people say that he was stiff with his figures, and in fact, if you run your eye along any Tarzan page, you see movement.
Yes,
you see actual movement going on from one panel to another.
He knew how to create that illusion of movement. And of course, he was the guy that Frazetta looked to the most.
I was going to mention that. I mean, if Frazetta is going to swipe you, then you must be doing something right.
Right. Frazetta just took that illusion of movement and pumped it up to another degree. But it started with Foster.
Dan Parsons and I were looking at some giant plots of black and white Tarzans that I got from Williams, not the original, but copies got from the original, and then comparing the black and white drawing to the big Dark Horse huge artist editions by color, a reprint of the whole Foster Tarzan run, and just dazzled all over again, and I always like to say that that was the birth, like Mark was alluding to, the birth of the comic book superhero as compared to the cartoon. Was Foster's Tarzan 30, starting 31 or so, and it was before comic book, and all those young guys, Siegel and Schuster and Jack Kirby and John Fatima, right? Joe Hubert, obviously. When they were 10 years old, they couldn't wait for Sunday to come along so they could open that giant full-page Tarzan comic strip and color on the floor in horror. They all say that. Every single one of them say that. Jack Kirby, all his interviews, he said that Foster's Tarzan, Foster's down moved. Speaking of movement, and then Joe Hubert said, "I swear it moved." I swear it was moving.
That's right. That's right.
And that's kind of the magic of comics. What comics can do that no other media does. It's obviously it's not real movement, but it's that illusion of movement, and you putting your imagination in what's happening between the panels to complete the movement. And that's unique to comics.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And it's kind of interesting also because it's realistically drawn. It's a semi-serious adventure story with people being shot and, scantily clad damsels and all this stuff. But the young kids that are looking at it, who are, whatever they were at that age, pretty young, 5 to 10-year-olds, were just totally absorbed in it. I remember Hubert said that when he saw that, he felt like he was riding on, as a little boy, he was riding on Tarzan's back. Tarzan swang through the forest. It just grabbed him like that. That was it.
And I'm glad you brought up Kubert, because there's another great Tarzan artist that we hadn't mentioned earlier, but top flight Tarzan artist.
Yeah, I love his run on the DC Tarzans was just fabulous. And of course they couldn't keep it going, but we all loved it.
Still a nice run.
I recommend the IDW reprint that George Hubert run.
Oh yeah, the large ones.
Yeah,
I've got a couple of those, and they are beautiful.
Their education.
See that brushwork, which is so. I mean, it's nothing. There's nothing really poetic about the brushwork. It's immediate. It's each stroke is an immediate stroke, and it carries something with it. And I was lucky enough to have him draw a Tarzan for me when he was out here for a Comic Con years and years ago. Hang on a second.
Oh man. Oh wow.
And
oh, nice, cool.
Fantastic.
Is that cool? And I had been ferrying him around in a car because he had some errands and stuff to run, and it was the end of the convention, and I was taking him out to get his RV, and he said, "Well, you never asked me for a drawing." And I said, "Well, I didn't want to bother you with anything." He says, "Well, what would you like?" And I said, "Well, I've always liked Tarzan. Could you do a Tarzan for me?" And he said, "Oh yeah, do you have," and he didn't have a pad with him, and I had put a pad in my back seat. So I pulled out this pad and I said, well, I just happened to have some paper, you could work on. So he just sat down and just did this spontaneously right off the cuff. And
what were the tools he was using?
He was using believe it or not, he was using a felt tip pen.
Was it really? Wow.
Yeah.
Sharp.
Yeah. And this is, I guess only because this is art paper that it hasn't bled like crazy, but this was back in 84. So.
But such variety of, different thicknesses and thinnesses, and wow. Wow.
Yeah, he just had one pen to work with.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah. He is a magician. Absolutely magician. In fact, with a minimum of pencil shapes, just like going there,
Yeah.
I have a Sergeant Rock page that he did. And I look at that, try to figure out what tool he was using for what lines, and I can't figure it out for the life of me. His marks look like nothing else, like no one else's. And like you say, they're so spontaneous and alive. I can't figure out. I wish I was half that loose,
Yeah.
Henry, can you switch over to me? I'll show you a Hubert I got on my wall. Just talking about this.
Hi, Dan.
Hey, how's it going?
We'll get there. Oh my gosh.
Double page spread.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Wow. Oh my goodness.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, all these loose rocket boards fairly rare.
Yeah, he said that Tarzan was his favorite thing he did when I was at school, and after this, I ordered it tiny, but with the Army stuff, that was just a job, and that was just a job. Tarzan was with and you can see it. It's just like unsupervised play to go through this to do this stuff.
Beautiful.
I love the shading on there too. It's just
so
great.
Yeah. I guess it's kind of underlighting from maybe from the planes or the thing.
Yeah.
Plane crashing. We've got apes in there that are just super well drawn. Very
What a dramatic composition too, to actually have to put the plane under Tarzan coming down, so you do get that light thrown up on him.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really cinematograph. That's like something you'd see in a movie by someone who really knew what they were doing with lighting and movement. Just that, again, that illusion of movement. It's just, again, he's a master. And unfortunately, underappreciated today because he had this loose style that isn't in step with the super tight work that's popular in comics right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
People like me, your stuff is pretty amazing. He could suggest those things. I had that assignment to draw that. I just go through, pulling teeth to figure out how to stage and see all of it. In fact, I did with a plane crash. Tarzan, it was from the World War II story, and Tarzan hanging on a parachute in the trees, and the plane crashes, and it's a mess. I mean, it's just like I don't know how to do it. It's like too much information for one picture. I mean, you look at that, and it's just like, man, it's like, how did you get so simply, so direct, without any, evidence of effort or struggling or trying to fix it? It's just like, boom, there's the image.
Hey, Thomas, you studied with Kubert. Do you have any idea if, for instance, for a double page spread like that, did he do a preliminary? Did he do a thumbnail working it out?
Yeah, he would do thumbnails, and he would get on the board, and he would erase, and he would get them, and he would erase, but his pencils were almost indecipherable. They were so loose.
Really?
But he would work it out in his own language of hieroglyphs. Joan says she mostly can't hear me. Sorry, Joan, I'm not what to do about that. He would do a lot of the drawing with a pen, and he used a pen kind of like this. If you can see this, it's a what we used to call a spool nib pen. This one is all tape, but it will thread, you know, as you make
Hold
a
it up a
line.
little higher.
Thin. It'll make a thick and thin,
There you go.
But it's fairly thick. We all called it a spool nib pen because way back in the day, this was a pen similar to this, but a little bit duller point actually with what they gave you at school when you see those old desks that have an inkwell where you put the bottle of ink in and the spool nib pen.
It's mighty thick. You get a mighty thick line.
Yeah, and so the thick line when Joe would draw a face, you know, with the wrinkles and the jowls and hands, it's incredible how well he draw a hand with just a circle. The hand's going to be here, and then he'd get it, go over there with this pen, and he just unbelievably well drawn hand would disappear in ink. He constantly erased to figure out where the hand was going to be in the composition, but then he do the real drawing directly, which you should never do. All your beginning artists out there, don't do that. If you were just you know it by now. Okay, the rest of us in your world have to figure this stuff out. You know, I'm constantly looking at my hands, and most artists do. Look at their own hands, draw hands.
But you know, I bet he didn't start out working that way. He just, again, putting in the reps is a lot of the business, right? You know, doing it over and over and over again. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, his early work is not like that Tarzan. You know, it's got a lot of energy to it. The only thing is the energy, but it doesn't look like that Tarzan. You know, definitely with me.
Will Eisner was like that too. He would just have very loose pencils, and I inked a piece of his once, and it was nerve-wracking because I need more to go on than what he was giving me.
Yeah, that's the same. Joe asked me to do something like this one time. He was curious what I would do with it, and oh yeah, sure. This ink's not that intimidating, but itself. It's not like a secret technique, like Mark's technique, you know. He doesn't have that. I think it doesn't look that hard. But the drawing he gave me was so loose, I couldn't quite ink it, but it didn't have the fire.
You sent it the result of drawing and
yeah, right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, we're all fortunate to have artists like him that are kind of part of our world.
Yeah.
All right, we have now hit the hour-and-a-half mark.
Yeah.
I'll open up the floor for one more question, and then we'll let Mark go back to living his life.
I'm going to go back to bed.
Any last question for Mark?
I had a question actually. When Mark was hand lettering for Cadillacs Dinosaurs, he was a speedball man. Was it a P4 or a P3 speedball man?
Oh, good Lord. First of all, I lettered, I think, 1 or 2 stories, and it was horrible. I'm not a good letterer. So my dear wife, Denise, stepped into the breach, and she's a pretty good calligrapher, and she has lettered all my work since then. And good question. She was using, I think it was a C4 that she razored down or what's filed down a bit.
Filed it
Right.
down, sanded it down.
But more recently, she's been using Kuhner rapidographs.
Oh,
really?
So, but to get that thick and thin line thing, she was using, I think it was the C4. Yeah.
Right.
Customized.
When I started out doing my little self-publishing, I was looking at the lettering that he would get to it. I guess his wife was doing it.
Oh, wow.
Tried to replicate it. Of course, it's terrible. But anyway, I put the one question I had.
It's a real thing to have the gene to be able to letter as well as draw. That's a toughie. But I don't know if you're lettering anymore, but if you have any questions, send them here and I'll get Denise to tell you what she's doing.
I told Thomas last night that when I'm thinking about being like a Kickstarter for my old Savage Planet comic, and I vow to hand letter it.
Okay.
I vow to.
Okay.
Well, there's a clinging to the old ways.
I love it. I love it. Some of the kids still get it. That's good.
All right, I think it's a great way of ending today's artist session. I want to, again, on behalf of the Burroughs Bibliophiles, thank Mark Schultz for offering his time to speak with us, and I'll review the video with him later to see if we post it on our YouTube channel. Otherwise, it's your participation and live questions that really made this an outstanding event. So thank you for that, and thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Great questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. Good to meet
Thank
you.
you,
Hope
Mark.
to see you in real life sometime.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mark.